Croeso, and welcome to Tales of Wales, the podcast that never fails to get the most handsome man in Wales back on. We got him again, guys. And we're recording this with visuals this time, so you were in for an absolute treat if you're watching on the picture.
We can back up our fawning of Luke with this now. Yeah, we've honey trapped him back into the pod.
And as you can see, Luke's dressed in fine fettle for tonight's episode.
I regret it instantly. How you doing, boys? You okay? What's going on? Boys, my head's a bit frazzled. I don't know why I decided to do this. I'm so hot in this. I'm like, I've been learning a lot about Chernobyl recently, and I feel like as hot as me. I shouldn't say that, but yeah, I feel boiling here. Like.
As a core reactor from Chernobyl. For people who can't see, Luke is dressed as a Spitfire pilot. Very dapper, I might say. Sheepskin jacket, goggles, and the earphones.
It looks like you're literally there going, Also, I love the idea that you've been in that like all day, getting into character, like you've gone in the mirror and stuff.
You know what? I've generally been listening to. I do listen to Finn Visits History.
Yeah.
So
big fan.
One recently with Al Murray, the pub landlord, where they just talk about airplanes and like. So I've listened to that recently. But yeah, I've just come back from. I just literally come through from London, so I've been selling pies on QVC, which sounds very London East End of me. But
you said this on the chat. So what you've been hacking pies up there? Hang on, let me just.
Oh, nice. Hang on. What are you drinking, by the way? If you're going to ask that question, I'm just curious.
Yeah, mate,
you go straight ahead, mate.
But you're right, Carlsberg, just as
Carlsberg, but in a Welsh jacket.
Oh, that's class. I don't hate me, okay? I thought because it's like, I thought I'd respect everyone who's. I'm just going to show you. I remember a vodka martini.
That is outstanding.
It's like genuine. I'm not joking.
That's
it's like
amazing.
Vodka. It's genuine.
Wow. Absolute. This new Neil Buchanan. This is what I made earlier, sort of thing. Like coming into frame.
So suave, bringing that because you also had a dummy, a decoy drink you were drinking a minute ago.
Yeah, I was saying the art of deception there because I saw you had a little like a short, and I was like, oh, he's on the whiskey or something like that, and then you fucking pulled that little bad boy out.
Yeah, I got a beer and then I thought I want something that looks a bit cooler. But yeah, I've been set up. So my partner's my wife to be. We're getting married in a month. Wife to be's family. She's boys. She doesn't run. Her family run a pie company, so they get me on QVC to sell the pies to people.
No way.
And that's what I've been today. Which it doesn't sound like a real job.
Were you in the same? You're in the same gear as you are now as well.
Maybe sold out. No pies left.
Best thing since the Spitfire boys. Yeah. Get your fucking pies now. Yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot of older people watch QVCC, so wearing this is like
they love it. They probably thought the Germans were back overhead. Panicking, bloody hell, getting this tagged again. Well, today's episode is going to be all about the Battle of Britain, but we're going to add in the Welsh element as we always do because if you have listened to that Finn Visits History, they kind of imply it was only the southeast or southwest. What would it be? Southeast of England. Which was, a lot of the action, but there was also a lot of Welsh representation. So we thought we'd
bring at the forefront. But as you'll learn through the course of this episode, there was a lot of things behind the scenes.
And look, you're a big fan of World War II, aren't you? It's kind of a lot of your you enjoy that era.
Yeah, I feel weird going serious now with this on. But
I was just about to say, you'd never tell, would you?
You know what? I love World War II so much. My 30th birthday was a World War II themed zombie party.
Wow.
That was my partner made it for me. It was class. And yeah, I think it's because it's such like an incredible story. And my grandfather fought in World War II, like a lot of people's grandfathers, great grandfathers did. But I first remember like really getting into it with two bits of like pop culture. One was Saving Private Ryan, and the second one was actually I think it was Medal of Honor Frontline, or one of the Medal of Honor
game.
What a big game!
You do D-Day, and then you also play as the Russians, and that's where I first learned about Stalingrad was playing that game.
Oh man, that was such a good fucking game. That was that game walked so like COD could run. Like when Modern Warfare came out and all that. That was definitely.
But I remember you're on like one of the boats that come in and like someone's speaking and get the ting of a bullet going through someone's metal helmet, and you just like, even as like an 11-year-old, I was like, fucking hell, this is so full on.
It's class.
Yeah. I think most of our grandparents all fought in World War II, and at the time, you just I wish I asked more questions. I really wish, because I think maybe lots of that generation maybe didn't like to speak about it, maybe, or my granddad never spoke about it, even though he was involved for the whole 6 years, and then just towards his end, just before he died, he actually then started to wear his medals, which he'd never done before. And I think it's it's one regret. I didn't ask him any proper questions about it, because he got shot during the war as well. He got shot in the arse. And he only got the bullet taken out in 1998 because he had a really uncomfortable sitting down. And then when they went to the doctors, they're like, "Oh, what do you think it is?" And he was like, "Well, I did get shot, and they just patched me up, and they still had a shard in there."
Just so you guys don't think my ancestors were Jesse Boy pacifists or something as well, right? My granddad, I think he was too young to fight. He's down the mines. My great granddad was actually part of the engineering crew that made the Merlin engine.
Oh.
Ran the Spitfire.
Yeah, so
you're welcome, lad.
That's pretty cool, actually. Yeah, that's pretty awesome. I'm trying to think if my grandfather died before I was born. He milked cows with his brother in French fields and stuff to be able to
get a bit of milk.
Yeah, and also the cows really needed milking, so him and his brother went around and milked all the cows. That isn't a euphemism. They weren't chasing women. They did go around and milk them.
That's what he told his family. He came back. Yeah, we were milking cows. That's what we were doing.
He brought his gun back as well. I'm sure he brought a gun back, and my dad remember seeing him shooting it in the air. And then there was a big amnesty, where basically you have one day where you can bring all your guns.
You give all your guns back, don't you? Yeah, because I bet so many people brought back these souvenirs, these plucky Tommies. I'm fucking having that.
Here's my 5 Lugers.
I would.
Sort of thing.
Do you know you mentioned Saving Private Ryan? I think my favourite TV show ever is Band of Brothers. I think it is it's perfect,
so sick,
and that's directed by Tom Hanks, who did Band of Brothers, Saving Private Ryan. But do you know in that they're always on about how they want to go steal a Luger? Oh, that one guy's obsessed with getting a Luger. That's another thing where I think, my God, I would have been such a coward.
I'd have been dog shit in war.
Yeah, I'd been so fucking terrified. Because you think you'd like to be a bit bravado and a bit to do this for my country. But the minute it all starts going wrong, I didn't want this.
Even if it was my best friends, on the front line, I'd be like, look, they know me well enough. They knew I wasn't going to come and help them.
I'd walk just a bit behind you. I'd be I'm right behind you, boy.
Right after you, Frank. No problem.
I'm covering the rear. I'm covering the rear.
Bastion, is it? Yeah, I can't wait to get in there, mate. Yeah.
I'd have to be drunk or something. I know, but there was. I think it was Almond who said this. Who said about how much we underestimate how much drugs played a part, especially Blitzkrieg and stuff. They were all on meth.
They were mad
speed.
On meth. Yeah,
and they said that the reason why Blitzkrieg was so successful in France is because you had red wine versus speed, and it's that's never going to win in a fight. But no one thinks about that as a thing.
But I didn't know. I listened to Shane Gillis's podcast, and he's a big history buff as well. And there's a documentary on there where you find out that they're just all on meth, all the Germans constantly
off their tits.
Yeah, little party boys going nuts for it.
Fair, because like you said, I would have to be at least pissed if you were going to fucking march me into war.
Vietnam and Korea, the Americans used to give the American soldiers speed and things to keep them awake at night. So at night they used to give them loads of drugs, but then that made them incredibly paranoid, and then that's why they had so much mutiny and turning on each other and disobedience, because they were all addled and completely they got into loads of heroin over there as well, but also they actually gave them lozenges of speed and meth and things to really rattle you up.
That's nuts. Yep, Apocalypse Now. See Apocalypse Now? He's on acid, isn't he?
He's on acid out there.
Yeah. Imagine that,
I know.
Being Vietnam on acid.
Yeah. Diddy Kong! Yeah. I said Diddy Kong, not Diddy Mao, and I got confused with that little monkey.
I was about to say Diddy Kong, Donkey Kong's younger cousin, or whatever the fuck it is,
Yeah. Well, should we jump into today's ep then? Because we're already a little bit in. Yeah. What we're going to do is try and highlight some of the Welsh involvement. I've got a little bit of background for people who don't know what it is, and then maybe Luke, do you want to go first with your? What is it? Is that a beer in the other glass?
That is a beer. It's I feel weird switching, but I fancied a really cool beer. Well, I'm trying to watch my calories to the wedding, but I haven't had beer in a week.
The world's yeah. Oh, nice. As Wales's most handsome man, you have to be the face of the country. So you got to have Slimline Tonic up until the wedding. I've got this next. The Bumby. This have you had this
Bamboo rum. I
Bamboo
love
rum.
that stuff. It's so
It
nice.
is the only one that could rival Batty TV rum. It's
fighting talk.
unbelievably good.
I would say close,
Batty wins,
but not
yeah.
quite. Yeah, it's
Yeah,
very
okay,
nice.
I went on I was like a classic post-30s man. I went on a smoking course. I was in like for barbecuing because I'm really into smoking meat, and I met a man there who works in like go into restaurants and suggesting what meat they get and what wine they get and what booze they get. And he says this is the only thing other than Bad TV that he recommends people buy is this one. And it is so
delicious.
nice, isn't it? So I'm going to have that in a second.
I'm right in thinking that's one, the sort of little bit of a banana sort of tint to it, isn't it? It's
You don't need, It's a strong one, but it's so sweet. It's almost like a dessert.
You can drink it straight if you're feeling a bit dangerous.
Yeah, well, I it's too sweet to mix it with anything, so I just have it over ice. So that'll be the next one.
Nice.
It's no vodka martini, Luke, but it's
not. Yeah.
I can imagine you, mate, just strolling into the mess hall in some RAF base now with that.
Yeah, you'd be a good officer. I think you'd be quite a good officer. Me and Jack, some dirty grunts.
You've been grounded after one too many vodka martinis.
But they used to get drunk, didn't they? Between like shifts and stuff. I was genuinely. I haven't got a moustache. I used to have a World War II moustache. I'll send you a photo. Like a proper, I used to have a proper moustache. I was going to draw on with my missus' mascara, but I thought that would be too much.
Is there going to be a theme for your wedding if you did a theme?
World War II zombies, can't wait, mate. It's going to be a theme. We're going quite DIY. We looked at how much wedding venues are and we thought, fuck that, because they're like 30 grand or whatever. So we decided we're going to do something that's more like creative. So I get, when's this going out? Actually,
we'll save it. Yeah, we'll save it. Yeah.
It's going to be fun.
Are you going to have like your family one side, your family the other side, she's waiting in the middle, down the aisle, you turn up in a Spitfire, bullet holes, going like that, go either side, you jetpack out.
Charlotte's family, you're the allies, you're going to have red wine over there, and then this bit in the middle, that's the marginal line, and then my family, they got some crystal meth speeders.
A couple too many vodka martinis. No, you're the Nazis, right? So we're going to fucking duff you up now.
Yeah. Well, talking of, I can't really segue from a wedding to. Talking of, we try and do little segues in between, but actually, we just referenced Battle of Britain, so I can't really segue from the Battle of Britain to this. But from a beautiful wedding day to a red wedding.
A not very nice day.
Not very nice. So that was a bit dog shit, wasn't it? We just take the specs off a second. But we're going to talk about the Battle of Britain. So I'll do a little bit of background info on it, just for people who don't know. And also, I think everyone who listens to this will know about, they'll have heard the word Battle of Britain. And I'm sure lots of our American listeners will maybe know about the Blitz, but probably not too much more than that, because most people get taught their own history. I was really surprised at what it actually entailed, and as a little bit of background, so the Battle of Britain saw the British Royal Air Force, the RAF, gain a decisive victory over the Luftwaffe in September 15th, 1940, after months of fighting the Nazis. The Battle of Britain was the first major military campaign fought entirely in the air, and it's the first time in history that a battle was waged exclusively by air forces, which is quite mad, isn't it?
That is a bit mad.
The RAF defended the UK against the German Luftwaffe in high-stakes aerial showdowns, and the battle was named by Winston Churchill before it had even begun. He referenced Hitler's plan to invade the UK, which we talked about last time you were on, Luke, didn't we, about the plan of Operation SEAL and
Operation Sea Lion.
He said the battle for France is over, the battle for Britain is about to begin. And he said the RAF were massively outnumbered, but they weren't outclassed. The Spitfire and some of the engines that the British had were far better than what the Luftwaffe had. The Luftwaffe had a lot more aircraft and pilots, but the RAF had home advantage, meaning they could refuel all the time. They knew the area, they were familiar with the terrain, they had access to rapid repairs and reinforcements. At the height of the battle, the Luftwaffe deployed around 2,500 aircraft compared to around 750 from the RAF. Around 500 pilots were killed from the British side, and we'll talk more about the Welsh side in a little bit. And then the German side lost nearly 2,000 aircrew. Many pilots, most were because nothing like this had kind of happened before. planes
It's
were
like
still relatively
untreaded
new.
ground, isn't it? Yeah.
So a lot of the people were very young. There was lots of people in their 20s, and there was lots of teenagers even. But this was the first military defeat, major military defeat for Hitler. And even though it happened quite early on, it was a really decisive moment. It completely stopped Britain being overwhelmed and taken over. By the end of October 1940, Germany had failed to gain air superiority, and Operation Sea Lion was indefinitely postponed, which, like you mentioned, was when they were going to take over Britain. And then Britain remained free from invasion. The battle was done in phases, so the battle unfolded in distinct phases. July to August was attacks on coastal shipping and radar stations. Then August to September, a full assault on RAF airfields. And then September onwards was the bombing of London and other major cities like Swansea, which is called the Blitz. And then the airmen became known as the few. And I didn't know this. You know when they say... So Winston Churchill said that famous thing, never in the field of human conflict is so much below to so many to so few.
Good impression.
I didn't know that was the few. I thought that was just like the soldiers fighting, but he was speaking about specifically the few being the pilots. And among them, there were 67 or 68. It's not 100% defined, but there were 67 to 68 pilots who joined from Wales who... a surprising number won gallantry awards for bravery and destruction. So considering they don't make up a huge majority, there was an overwhelming amount of success from Welsh pilots. And when I come to my bit later on, I'm going to talk specifically about one of the aces who was renowned for being a right laugh and a big old ledge.
Class.
So that's a little intro. We've all got I've only got one story after this. Everyone else has got two, I think, of like headlines of the Welsh involvement. So I'm going to pass over to the martini drinking man himself. He swigged that right on cue as well. So over to you, Luke. What's your first tale?
So I'm going to just talk for a little bit about Pembrey. So I'm from Llanelli, and the other side of Llanelli, further west, is a place called Pembrey. And Pembrey was the only fighter command kind of unit that was in Wales. So it would cover like the western flank. So what they would do is that there's a lot of infrastructure, as we know, in Wales, like coalfields, oil depots, docks, industry, and we were almost kind of guarding the back door over in Pembrey. And what the pilots would do, they would like sit in these little huts and live in them right next to the runways, ready to go straight away. And one thing I learned, this is from Al Murray as well, it's quite cool, is that a lot of British Airways, what they realised was that if they had them on grass, it would be much easier to repair. So say if they were concrete, for example, you drop a bomb on it from the Germans and you have to get, a boulder, right? And there's grass, you could just chuck earth in there. They'd have literal, like steamrollers and stuff ready to just put the girth in the floor, which is quite cool.
That's mad, yeah.
But yeah, because it was so easy, and also they could tell which way the wind was blowing from the grass and like little things like that. Yeah. That just gave us again that home advantage. But so the pilots lived in huts, so they could just scramble.
They know what you're talking about. Yeah.
It's mad, isn't it? But the thing is, in Pembrey though, they didn't have that much action. So when I think about it, there's different groups in Britain of where the different commands were, and Group 11 was the most busy. That was down by southeast England. But Group 10 was the one in Pembrey. In my mind, Group 11 is almost like the orgy, and Group 10 or Pembrey was almost like the cuck in the chair in the corner waiting to just get involved. It made me worse because you're kind of waiting and waiting. So Pembrey was the only... Sorry, about a martini. Pembrey was the only fighter command in Wales. So you have three commands. You have Fighter Command, which is basically the planes that go and shoot down bombers. Bomber Command, which went over to bomb Germany and Berlin and all that. And then Coastal Command, which would be obviously based on the coast, looking out for the Germans. So it was the only one that existed. And there was one guy who was based in Pembrey a few times. He wasn't Welsh, he was English, but his name was Robert Stanford Tuck. And he was a bit of an ace pilot as well. He'd done really, really well in World War One and was just an absolute kind of ace. He would kind of get loads of confirmed shooting downs and stuff. Yeah. Now, the Nazis were bombing, or on the way to bomb, the shit of Bristol. And Tuck thought, I'll leave it as a shithole anyway. He didn't say that. He thought, right, I'll jump on a plane, I'll scramble, as they say, and he went off after them. But he was based in Pembrey at the time, and that's the kind of Welsh link. And he chased this German plane for, I've looked at different sources, and they say different timings. Some say 20 minutes, some say an hour. But he chased this plane for quite a long time along the Welsh coast. Ended up opening fire on the German plane, because remember, their machine guns are tuned to a certain distance. You got to kind of get you got to get it perfect, yeah. So he shot the plane down, and he started shooting at the plane. The German plane shit itself, dropped the bombs, and it fell and killed Private John King Park in a kind of an army camp. And John King Park was Tuck's only brother-in-law. So he kind of, in a way, resulted in his brother-in-law's death, which is
crazy.
Quite strange. It's kind of a weird kind of anecdote. But so you could argue that he won the battle by scaring off the German planes to bomb Bristol, but he lost the war.
But to his own detriment, sort of thing, yeah.
Absolutely.
You would be thinking, what are the fucking odds of that? Wouldn't you?
I know.
You'd be like, the one place he drops.
It's mad, isn't it? And I think there was a thing with Pembrey. It's almost quite weird that there was no action there, because I went down there loads as a kid, and there's bunkers literally everywhere, and you're almost like, do you know, like when they built that big hospital in their preparation for COVID and it wasn't used? It's a bit like that, like quite eerie. Again, in Operation Sea Lion, there's a lot of speculation as to whether Hitler would have landed some of his troops and boats there, because the beach is massive down at Pembrey. So almost though we didn't have much of the action down there, I think, because I'm from there, and it just feels like a part of the story I wanted to bring into
you, sort of thing. Yeah, that's also like I said, that is a crazy mad story. That's one of those like what they called, like monkey paw type things, and they were like, I
you
really
get to be
hope
a hero.
I wish I get to be a hero and defend my nation. Okay, the monkey paw kills, but your brother-in-law dies, type thing. Yeah, 100%. That's crazy.
But there was reports of soldiers who were quite frustrated, so they were kind of sat there and they wanted to get in the mix and get in on the action. So Pembrey was almost a place where, I know I said the joke earlier, they generally felt cucked in terms of like war language,
watching all the action from afar.
Yeah, exactly. And that was also the last quick thing about Pembrey is I used to take a rucksack down there full of army soldiers with my dad, and I would like set up a little war.
I love that.
So that feels quite weird that was where our RAF fighter command was based, and I went down there and played my little soldiers and did a little battle.
So that's cool, man.
So that's my first story, which links to
I used to do. I'd say Llanelli is the best Welsh accent. I think that is the creme de la creme.
You can't help but flirt with him.
I do. I like Scott Quinnell. You know Scott Quinnell. They had him on the Ellis James podcast reading out like quotes from history, and they had him reading out.
It's a live show, isn't it?
Yeah, they had him reading out the Winston Churchill's "We'll Never Surrender" speech, and it did it in his voice, and it was like, I just know it's so lyrical.
In the thing as well, they had the live show. They had him reading out "Ich bin ein Berliner," the Kennedy speech.
The Kennedy speech is so
funny.
Yeah.
But I'm pretty sure he did a salute at the end. I think the one you're not meant to do.
Who did? Scott Quinnell?
Yeah. It's like I don't know if he got what it was about.
What?
It was mad. But I also used to do all my holidays down in Pembrey. What's the little park down there that has like a toboggan?
Chemistry Dan.
And it's that goes on to the beach down. I'm pretty sure it was a nudist beach down there.
I don't know.
I remember seeing.
You wished it was.
I remember because my brother made me. I was too young. I was like 8, and he made me stand somewhere. He kept telling me to move over there. He took a photo, and I didn't realize because there was a naked person in the background. So he took that, and he got some free snaps.
They have a pitch and putt there, and they have loads of there's a pitch and putt, but amongst World War II bunkers, it's quite weird. But the bunkers there are genuinely like massive. And was one of the first times I got really drunk was down there as well. It was GCSE's results night, and I was camping down there, and we were camping in Pembrey, and what we would do, we sneak, there was like a dry ski slope, so we climb up like illegally, whatever, and then sit on the top and just drink on the top of the ski slope. And what they'd have like a ranger go around in a jeep, apparently. And I don't condone this what happened, okay? I wasn't part of this next bit. But one of the boys went to hole number 7 and took a shit in the hole.
Wow. One of the boys, classic.
I get it. And I'm thinking, boys, That's just memento.
I didn't even want to come drinking up beer on the top of the slope. This is ridiculous. Yeah.
I went to Freshwater West with my wife on our mini honeymoon. And I force all my hobbies upon her. And we went metal detecting down there because they used to practice down there for an invasion from the Germans. And we found, I got them here actually, we found fucking loads and loads of 1942 bullet shells. And they did it in Pembrey as well. I'm not sure if you can see these. But these are all bullet casings. And we found bits of grenade, loads of bits of grenade, because they practiced. They were defending the beaches down there in case Operation Sea Lion happened. But Pembrey was also another place they practiced in the sand bunkers there. They used to have loads. So apparently, for nerds who like metal detecting, it's an amazing place to go. And in Britain, in Wales and England, the only place you can legally metal detect without landowner's permission is the beach. So if you want to get like a cheap one, and it's like it costs us like £50 to buy one online, and we found like really cool stuff with it. So
that's class. I was doing a kids' TV job once, and it was 4 of us doing it. And one of the girls who was one of the actors saw a metal detector on Barry Beach and turned to me and said, "Luke, if I could imagine you have any hobby outside of this, it would be that." And I didn't know how to take it, and I thought, do you know what? That actually looks class. Yeah. Is it fun? Sorry,
it's really fun. It's nice because I just get to go on a walk with the dog on the beach and stuff. And that TV show, The Detectorist, is like the guy from The Office, Mackenzie Crook. It's a really a nice show, and it's got beautiful music and it's really beautiful.
Toby Jones, isn't it? Yeah,
Toby Jones,
brilliant. Yeah.
And it's apparently the amount of people who've taken up metal detecting has gone through the roof, and there's been loads of new finds and stuff. And if you like history, especially if you like World War II stuff, the beaches in Wales have loads of little bits you can find. And then
we went one time, didn't we?
Yeah,
with the girls,
we had,
it wasn't that productive. Yeah, we found this one. We found something. We were like, it's going to be an ancient Saxon coin, but it was like an old jerry can. We couldn't actually get out of the ground. It was too deep.
Right, Jack, do you want to do your
Go
Welsh?
on then. And actually,
Welsh
this
connection?
is somewhat related to what you were on about, Luke. So something I found when I was looking into this was that Wales was kind of almost like a recovery bench during the Battle of Britain for both man and machine. During the battle, tons of airfields in southeast England were under threat, with runways being cratered, hangars being destroyed along with their aircraft. But at the time, Wales wasn't considered a high-value target by the Germans, which made it a bit of an invaluable place to send damaged aircraft. It was also ideal for pilots that had been damaged in the air because they could land safely and have their planes repaired rather than having to ditch out at sea or crash land on an overcrowded runway in southern England type thing. So this all meant that more pilots survived their engagements, more aircraft were repaired and sent back into the fray, and the pressure was taken off those kind of manic bases that were front and centre, the sort of where all the planes were coming out of in the southeast of England. And one that came up actually in my research was RAF Pembrey in Carmarthenshire. That was part of what was known as the RAF's Western Defensive Network, which had Hurricanes flying out from there. Yeah. I'm not the biggest plane nerd ever, but Hurricanes, they're a good one apparently. I don't know. But they used to fly out there, and they'd be on patrols for German approaches from the Atlantic or from Western France. And Pembrey was also one of the many overflow airfields that squadrons and aircraft were rotated through. So there wasn't just one place absorbing all the engineering work. So if they were getting really busy, you reallocate them to another airfield in Wales, and it would just be it's all about relieving the pressure on the most busy airfields in the country, essentially. Other sites in this rotation included RAF Hawarden, RAF Llandurog, and RAF Hellsmouth on the Llŷn Peninsula. Sorry. And then on the human side of things as well, pilots were flying multiple combat sorties a day. They were on minimal sleep and under a shitload of psychological strain, as you can imagine. So having these Welsh airfields to rotate through, when they were downed and they had to emergency land in one of these, it'd take time to repair the plane, have them recover, or send them to the nearest active airfield, if you like, to be sent up in the air again. It just gave them a real reprieve And it also was a good thing for like retraining people. I was reading, so it was like people who needed brushing up on certain things while they were waiting. They'd have like experts like brush them up on the latest whatever it was, or like brush them up on techniques that they needed brushing up on. I'll say brushing up more times. There was also the coastal command element in Wales that I read about, which is bases like RAF Pembroke Dock would issue aircraft to patrol western approaches, the Bristol Channel and Atlantic routes that fed towards Britain. Some of the aircraft operating out of this base were these what were called like large flying boats. I don't know if you guys have ever heard of these things before. I certainly hadn't. But one of them is called the Sunderland. If you Google that, the Sunderland flying boat, right, it looks fucking enormous. It is genuinely like a ship with wings. And these guys would protect, they'd fly out of Pembroke Dock, they'd protect convoys, they'd hunt submarines, and basically keep an eye on like anything along the coast or into the sea, anything dodgy coming from Germany, basically. In terms of, because it was such an airborne battle, these were like the redundancy, like sea guys to like just keep an eye on the water. But yeah, I thought this is a very short one. Sorry, it's not the most in-depth for notes.
Have you seen they're trying to bring one back from Pembroke Dock seabed? There's a heritage group is called on the public's help to raise a unique World War II seaplane from the estuary seabed in Pembroke Dock. The Mark I Sunderland sank in a violent storm in 1940, but was rediscovered by divers in 2006. So it's underwater at the moment, and they want to bring it back.
Can you see a picture of the Sunderland?
Yeah, it's fucking
They look huge. I can't believe something like that. I always struggle to, like, how do people make something like that huge and like bulky fly? Yeah. It looks so unaerodynamic. But yeah, I like the idea that, and this is probably a nerdy reference, but they like, Wales was like the support class in like the party. It was like the healer in an RPG game.
Yeah, you nerd. You absolute dork. Well, shall I go on to a specific pilot then for my one? And I thought before I start, I'd like kind of quickly explain, like, just I think, Luke, you kind of mentioned it, but it was incredibly hard to actually hit other planes. So like hitting a plane in the sky was incredibly difficult, and it was kind of more just as be a deterrent to the big bombers who were dropping all the bombs on Britain. So yeah, what they really did was added like a bit of a defensive line from the bombs. But in reality, during the Battle of Britain, most fighter pilots shot down like very few enemy aircrafts. And I try to find exact figures, but what I came up with is averages. So the majority of RAF pilots didn't score a single confirmed kill. A solid or active pilot might shoot down 1 to 3 max over the whole battle. And even highly capable pilots ended up with fewer than 5 victories.
Well, isn't it like if you shoot down 5 enemy planes in the air, you're no, you
haven't. But this is how much in tune we are together. So air combat was really chaotic, fast, and dangerous, and encounters were like really brief. Visibility was really poor, so getting confirmed kills was really hard. But if you did get over 5 kills or more, that's when you became an ace. So a pilot was, if you got 5, and you have to have the kills confirmed, so they have to kind of check that they've actually happened. But yeah, if you managed to get 5, that then classed you as an ace pilot. And this is a standard used.
There was a game of that, wasn't there? Ace Pilot.
Was there? Well,
I remember that. Yeah.
When I used to play computer games, I never liked being in a machine. I always liked being an infantry. I didn't like having to like be in a plane or a tank.
I don't mind. There's something about, this is a massive segue from World War II to Modern Warfare, but like I played Battlefield 6 recently.
Oh yeah.
And first game I had, jumped in a tank, in 3 minutes I had 20 kills. I've never had that in any game in my life. So I used to be not fussed with machines, but I remember playing again. I think it was Men of War Frontline. You're in a tank. You're playing like a Russian tank. I remember thinking this is class. But there is also that guy who looks at Fury. They will go to Brad Pitt movies. Rips it apart completely.
Yes, mate. One of my favourite pastimes is watching YouTube videos, experts looking at films and like the specialists, and they like judge it. And I think I've seen that same one where he's just like, "This is bollocks. You'd never do that in like a tank fight." But,
in that film, Shia LaBeouf pulled out his own tooth to like
what? And he cut himself on the cheek as well, and then kept reopening the scab to give himself a scar for the film.
That film isn't worth that.
There's makeup departments that can do that, mate. You don't have to worry about it.
He is a bit nuts, isn't he? So it's really rare. So only a very small minority of pilots ever reach the ace status. There's one person. There's like a Polish guy. So a lot of the well, not a lot, a considerable, maybe a surprising number of pilots who made up the Battle of Britain were actually from like New Zealand, Australia. Some were from Poland, Czech Republic, those parts of like the ex-Soviet Union, was modern day ex-Soviet Union, and even USA and Ireland, and both of those were neutral at the time. So it wasn't just British pilots. I think one of the most successful was this Polish guy who got like 22 confirmed kills. Or planes downed. But we're going to look at a Welsh bloke called Sergeant Glyn Griffiths, who joined the Royal Air Force Volunteer Reserve and completed refresher training at Number 5 Operational Training Unit. I won't go into too much of the background stuff because it's I don't know, I don't really know a lot about it. But he switched from being a squadron flying the Bolton Paul Defiant, and he ended up doing the Hurricanes, which are the ones you mentioned. They were like really very, very, very British style of plane. He was based at Kenley, and then the squadron flew over Dunkirk and then operated from France. So he was involved fighting on the mainland of Europe, but also fighting defending Britain. He got his first ever. He recorded his first successful downing on the 7th of June, where he damaged and downed a Messerschmitt B5109. And then
Germans have the best names for stuff.
Yeah, Messerschmitt.
The Luftwaffe.
Then returned to the UK, but a few days later, his squadron were moved to Debden, and he became heavily involved in the Battle of Britain. So he left France and Belgium, and he came back to fight in the Battle of Britain. And he really quickly built this combative record. On the 9th of July, he destroyed a Heinkel He 111, followed by two more on July the 12th, both 2 in one day, which is like incredibly unheard of. So in the space of the 9th to 12th, he downed 3 German planes. He also shared in downing a Bf 1110 on the 11th of August and was credited with the probable downing of another He 111 on the 5th of September. And then on August the 18th, his Hurricane was damaged in combat, forcing him to do an emergency landing at Manston, where his aircraft was completely destroyed during a Luftwaffe attack, and he had to take refuge whilst he was getting shot at on the floor. And then he also downed a JU or Jew. I don't want to say Jew HEA because it doesn't think that's probably the most.
You're just inviting criticism there, aren't you?
Yeah. So JU HEA, and then another BF 110, BF 109, and overall, he got around 7 downs, which is really impressive for someone who didn't fight for an awfully long time. And he also damaged a whole bunch. He damaged these Junker Jews, and 87 dive bombers, a number 7. He just was incredible. Even though he didn't down them,
he's absolutely. What's his KD ratio?
Yeah, exactly. He was downed once, and he got 7 confirmed, and then sent a lot packing. So he damaged a whole bunch of them as well, which was really important, so they couldn't get to their destinations. And then during a major engagement off Essex coast, he shot down 3 Junker Jew dive bombers. One of them a shared downing, which is when both of you hit someone. So they often go in formations of 3. So he is as a number 17 squadron, he claimed multiple successes against the attacking force. And in recognition for his successes over the preceding months, he was awarded the Distinguished Flying Medal, the DFM, in late November, and he was the first man from Llandudno to receive any sort of gallantry award from the Second World War. And in the London Gazette, they wrote about him. They said, "This airman has showed splendid courage and initiative in his attacks against the enemy. He has destroyed at least 6 aircraft so far, 2 of which were shot down in one day." That's the London Gazette on the 26th of November, 1940.
And then, cool.
Like you mentioned, the training. He then came back to train people how to do this as an instructor. So he then started to, for the next 2 years, he spent time in Canada training up Canadian troops and how to become ace pilots. And then he, on return to operation to France, his wingman collided with the aircraft, and it got set on fire when he was taken off. and Griffiths had to bail, but he was also incredibly badly burnt from this kind of like friendly accident, and his wingman ended up dying. And Griffiths was sadly hospitalised for ages and needed medical care for the remainder of the war. But during his time, he was promoted to flight lieutenant, and he ended the war credited with having destroyed 10 aircrafts, 5 of which were shared with other pilots. Some of which were shared with other pilots, and he damaged plenty of others. He's believed to have probably destroyed at least 3. Hang on. My notes just fallen off there. So he believed to have probably destroyed something else.
A few other bits.
Yeah. But returning to civilian life, and after being released by the RAF, he then went to work in London, and he worked as an engineer for the Gaslight and Coke Company, which was a mad combination. But because of how much he helped Britain, and not just Britain, Belgium and France, the Belgian or the Belgique government awarded Griffiths the Order of Leopold II, which, if you know about Leopold II...
I was just saying, Leopold, a real bastard.
Yeah.
He was the fucking horrible one, wasn't he?
Yeah, real nasty piece of work.
He's one of the worst people in history.
We've granted you the Adolf Hitler Award. And
do you know about that story? There's a Welshman who helped design the maps for Leopold II, and he's like incredibly instrumental.
When did we talk about that one? That was
a listener
recently, wasn't it?
A listener has said we have to do this episode on him, and I looked at his background, and my God, he's like,
I think I covered it on one of the ones, not in super depth. We did like 3 people each. We did like 3 people each. And he basically, he was like, I'll help you out. And he was like a proper racist of the time as well. Yeah. And he was like, I'm just drawing maps, it's fine. Yeah. And it was like, no, you enabled like one of the biggest genocides in like
Henry Morgan Stanley, that's his name.
Yeah.
And he's
like, he drew the maps for Leopold
and he was
to do what he did in Africa.
He literally showed like, so he's like the architect of some of the biggest atrocities in human history. And he's like, we're meant to be like quite proud of Welsh people. This guy is probably one
guys, occasionally we get a bad egg as well. Okay,
you know what?
It's fine. Yeah.
I think it's important though. I did a video once, which was basically 5 times the Wales are the bad guys. As Wales, we try to like. I think generally speaking, we've been like the victims, and and I think that's quite a popular thing. But I did one where I talked about slave owners. We had like pirates who raped and pillaged.
We rose tint our own history a lot, don't we? We're a bit like
we admit that we're a bit biased, don't be wrong. Like 9 times out of 10 we're glazing ourselves, but we're happy to also call out the pieces of shit as well that happen to the Welsh.
But so the Belgian government awarded Griffiths with the Order of the Leopold II, and the French gave him the Croix de Guerre for services for the liberation. That's another Belgique one. Just it's in French because the Belgians are a bit mad like that, aren't they? His medals are on show along with his what's it called? His battle log. And his Battle of Britain clasp, and his Atlantic Star, and his war medals are all on display at the National Museum in Cardiff. So you can go have a look at all of his stuff that he's got there. But he's one of the most decorated Welsh pilots in history.
That's
and
crazy.
That is, Sergeant Glyn Griffiths.
That's mad that you need 5 to be an ace, and he's just gone like, I've just fucking peaked way above that.
There's 7 complete confirmed. But then there's 3 that were also, they're classed as like probable, but spelt with they're not spelt like probable how we would. It's spelt like a French word of saying it. And he's got 3 there. So overall, he's got 10.
So you're saying he's a guaranteed double ace.
Yeah. And then he's got a bunch where they attacked and injured and fell back. But that is the story of one of Wales's best RAF members. So now, Luke, your final one.
Before I do that, can I really quickly get my charge of my laptop? Because
Absolutely.
I'm on 6%. I'm really sorry. I do apologize. I'm professional.
That's right. Well, I'm going to go for a quick piss. So that's just.
I was going to take the opportunity as well. Why not?
Yeah. I'm going to make another volume arty. I'll be 3 or 4 minutes. Is that okay?
I'll be 15 minutes to make my vodka martini.
Yeah. Let's all have a little breather.
See you sec.
Should we start back off then? So, Luke, your final Welsh history fact about the Battle of Britain.
Okay, so I've heard of different people say that the Battle of Britain, like, where it starts and where it ends, and kind of where it kind of sits into it. Some people say the Blitz was an extension of the Battle of Britain. Germany started bombing certain areas during the daytime, realising that wasn't getting them anywhere, and then they realised that nighttime bombing was the way to go. So some people feel that the Blitz was also a continuation of the Battle of Britain. So mine is more Blitz related as opposed to fighting the Luftwaffe, but it's still relevant.
Anticipated sequel.
Absolutely, yeah. I say about sequel. I also heard that if you were to split World War II into 3 movies or like acts, you'd have the Battle of Britain. You could argue would be like the end of Act 1, which is the first kind of time where the Nazis were like, "Oh fuck, we can't beat these guys and girls." And then the end of Act 2 is Stalingrad, the real turning point, and then the end of Act 3 obviously being Hiroshima and Nagasaki. But we're going to go back to 1897 for a second, only because there was an architect in Swansea which was heavily blitzed, which I'll mention in a second. He was an architect, and he really wanted. So I know this. I did a tour of Swansea recently. I did like a Dylan Thomas and Swansea tour, and he wanted to build the St Mary's Church on Oxford Street in the middle of Swansea. It's not there anymore. I'll explain why in a second. But it was built during the Victorian era, and he really wanted the what's the word? The commission or like the kind of contract to make this church really beautiful and great, and did it. And yeah, his name was Thomas S. Johnson. But when he was told he wasn't going to get the commission or get the design, he went in a proper like poody and was really annoyed and was really tamping about it. So what he did, he thought, fuck this, and created a 4-foot tall devil, which he put on top of a building overlooking the church, almost like a weird kind of gargoyle. And the devil I've seen has like his hand, his chin, and it's kind of like looking down. And sometimes they put flowers on it. It was basically a massive FU to the church that didn't allow him to build it. So fast forward now to World War II. As we know, the Swansea was a big part of the Blitz. It was later on in the story, but it was more like the early 1941. It was like over 3 kind of big main nights in the middle of February. And there were some raids there before and after, but there was like 3 days where it just was absolutely insane. And it wasn't like random either. It wasn't like, oh, we'll see a city and just bomb it. Because when the Luftwaffe were leaving more northern England, if they hadn't dropped their payloads, often they would drop it over a place like Hull. And that was because Hull was a strategic position. They just thought we need to get rid of our bombs. So Hull became almost like a dumpster of like German bombs.
The last thing you want to be, the dumpster of the bombs. Like, please don't. Please don't anymore. Yeah,
it's insane. But Swansea wasn't. It wasn't random though, because Swansea was obviously big for what's the word? Industry and things like oil, and its nickname was Copperopolis. I'm not sure if you know this, but Swansea's nickname was Copperopolis.
Cool,
industry. Because it was on the south, it was more accessible to kind of German bombers, as maybe opposed to places like Liverpool, for example. So Swansea was really having a bit of a bad time during this time. And the Luftwaffe, they dropped a range of different bombs as well. So they used high explosive bombs to like tear open kind of buildings and infrastructure and factories. And then they would also use the same type of bombs we used in Dresden, so incendiary bombs. So basically fire starters.
Nasty stuff,
yeah, really, really minging. So they would, the buildings would be completely broken open, incendiaries would start massive fires, there was massive, massive panic, and people often say in South Wales, Swansea got bombed, but I don't know if people realise the scale. So around 85 to 90% of Swansea city centre was completely destroyed or really badly damaged beyond repair. Places like High Street, Castle Street, even like shopping districts. So at the time, what really messes up during the Blitz, so we had radar on the coast and stuff. Britain had this thing called the Dowding system, where there was points all over the coast where you'd have essentially a mix of radar and just like blokes with binoculars who were just looking out onto the coast and stuff.
Twitches.
And then they would tell the map girls who were like in the HQs where they were in the radar. And it was basically a moving puzzle constantly. And there was they colour coded it as to how recent the data was. So one colour was like 15 minutes ago, one was half hour ago. So it was literally like a live radar
so
map
clever,
beneath them.
When you see the photos,
mad, isn't it?
Yeah, I think people might know this image of like a lady with like 2 pens with a string attached to moving it closer.
Like that,
yeah.
But it's like the manpower involved and women power, of course.
People power.
The people power. Sorry, sorry, guys. All right. The people power involved with like the just
But also, like,
you can't imagine it these days because people go, "That's not worth investing that much time in like
But
such
also,
an accurate
like,
system."
I'm not like, I'm so bad at maths and science and that side. My brain is not that kind of brain. So if it was left to me to figure out how can you stop or how can you track I'd literally be clueless. I'd be like, oh, I don't know, just throw rockets in the sky. Whereas sometimes some people are so clever. They go, let's think of a system. Let's figure out how we can do this in one way.
Yeah, with me they'd be like going, "Oh, when did that report come in? Oh, I don't know.
I don't know,
A while ago.
Figure it
know.
out."
I'd be there with my fucking my beer cozy and my cat. I don't fucking know, mate. Jesus Christ.
But yeah, it's mad, and they would do it like, you know, kind of so quickly as well. And the communications are going back and forth. It was proper nuts. And people have this kind of romanticized view that we were always kind of on the back foot, but our systems were really kind of high tech for the time. Like, this is the first time we had a proper battle in the air. So anything that was like above that was just like state of the art. When the Germans started deciding bombing over at night time, we couldn't do anything to stop it. Like, we couldn't, because this body bypassed the radar. We were just looking out for them and using a flak gun.
Oh, Christ, yeah.
Most of the time we couldn't hit them because it was so hard. So the was purely morale. So we were wasting rounds and rounds and rounds just to show people in Britain we were fighting back, but we would never hit them. So they couldn't see the bomb either. So it's random.
It'd actually be better, like, financially and sort of resource wise, to just not even shoot, not even to bother with it. Like,
But it added morale. But to go back to Swansea, though, there was around 230 people who were killed, hundreds more injured, thousands were left homeless. There was my partner's grandfather got evacuated from Swansea out to, I think, Pembrokeshire way, and he had a great time. He lived on a farm for ages. But people were panicking, people didn't know what to do. I think also, I wonder if there was maybe a little bit of like a false sense of security because we were in Wales and most of the fighting was happening down in the south, in the southeast. But it was an attempt for Germany to really break our industry, our morale, our spirit. But linking back to the first story, so Swansea got really bombed, which links back to the guy who had the gargoyle statue on this building, and so after it bombed St Mary's Church, the church the man was supposed to build, Thomas S. Johnson. That was completely destroyed, and legend has it, and I've seen the devil, so it still exists. The building and the devil that contained this devil was completely intact. So I got this funny image of everyone in Swansea being gutted, this lovely church being destroyed, but this Tom guy is absolutely chuffed. So a bit. So that's my link to it. So a bittersweet victory for Tom, even though everything else is destroyed. You know,
so hard of Dog Soldiers.
I was thinking
story they said in Dog Soldiers.
Yeah.
So for
the
those
only
who don't
thing
know,
on his arse is a great
big grinning devil. So for those who don't know, the listeners, there's a story in that. Actually, I am going to butcher it if I try and tell it.
But
So just watch Dog Soldiers.
They're out in like the Gulf War, and they're all getting tattoos, and one bloke gets a tattoo of the devil on his ass, and he says, "My soul belongs to God, but my body is destroyed, and that belongs to the devil." And one time they're scanning for mines, and
that's right.
He hits a mine, blows up, and they're picking bits of his skin and body up from being hit by this mine. They're picking up bits of teeth, bits of ear. They recognise like a finger, and then completely unscathed with no damage whatsoever is this tattoo of a laughing devil on his ass that they find.
I say it reminds me of that. The devil was watching him. I googled it, by the way, what you said about the devil statue, and it's it's kind of creepy. It's like it's not what I thought. I thought it'd be like, full on red devil, red horns and all that. But it's like he looks more like he looks something out of a who's the guy who does the Labyrinth movies? Jim Henson.
Oh, Jim Henson.
Like a Jim Henson kind of movie,
Yeah, he looks like he almost looks like an Arabian. He looks a bit like Jafar, and he's got like that red and dark black. He's a bit,
do you want me to keep in the fact that you associated Arabians with the devil in that little bit?
He actually looks like a genie coming out with his like the fire with his like tail.
He does look a bit Jafar-esque.
Yeah.
It's a bit. It's more. I'd say more gargoyle because gargoyles have
does
like
look gargoyle-y. Yeah. They're
I would
like
say
metal,
that.
isn't it?
Yeah. It's not really. I don't know what his other work looked like, but that doesn't look like a guy who could make a beautiful church. It doesn't look rich.
Maybe he said, "Oh yeah, well, fuck you guys. I just made a devil outside your church." And they went, "Yeah, look the state of that, man. I'm glad we didn't give you the fucking contract." Actually,
Yeah, that's well, you can make a devil, but your church looks like let us enter.
Yeah. And jokes on them anyway. Their church fucking got bombed anyway, so the devil was looking after the place.
Yeah,
I thought it was quite a funny anecdote of the links to the Blitz, but it's still kind of in the same. You could argue in the same thing. About
So the building of which Old Nick was mounted was not hit, and they remained standing through the war, thus allowing Old Nick to continue laughing over the burnt remains of the church. Oh, that's pretty cool.
It's devious when you say it like that, isn't it? Yeah.
Oh, apparently, the local man reputed to have prophesied, "When your church is destroyed and burnt to the ground, my devil will remain laughing."
Ooh, that's pretty cool.
That's a pretty sick one. And what's your last one, Jack?
All right, should we end on an absolute bum note? Should we?
Oh God!
It's not a bum note. It's you guys have done such really.
It's just
research.
boring. Yours gonna be like fucking
not boring.
admin.
Not boring.
Not
it's
boring.
all right, but it's just a little bit less research than you boys. But anyway, the second thing.
The Luftwaffe were German. Oh.
Yeah, and actually, they like doing knitting. And this is going to be about the shadow factories, which is a cool name to start off with. To be fair, shadow factories. These are essentially.
Don't try and sex it up.
No, I got to try and sell it a little bit. They were essentially factories that were built very far away from obvious bombing targets. They were spread far and wide across the country, usually tacked onto existing industrial estates and designed to back up and duplicate aircraft production. So they were like, I know that you're going to go now, oh, that is boring, aircraft production, but it was important at this time, okay?
What, so were they fake factories or were they actually...
No, they were like, Shadow Factory, the thing I was reading about it was, you think
Sounds
Shadow
like
Factories...
Shadow Facts, like Lord of the
does
Rings
Shadow
was.
Facts show us the meaning of haste? But it sounds like, doesn't it, Shadow Factory is like, ooh, like illicit behaviour, like sort of subterfuge and like clandestine stuff. It was basically just, it was meant to be more, they're in the shadows, they're away from like prying eyes, so they're like, they're hidden.
Well, do you know, like... they used to have inflatable tanks to pretend where the tanks were in Britain. And
I love shit like that when you like all these mad operations that happened in World War II.
Yeah. Well, do you see the Iranians? They drew a shadow of a fighter jet on the floor.
Yeah.
What?
And then America bombed it.
Bomb it. Yeah.
What? Really?
Yeah, it happened like a couple of weeks ago. And they were like, that's a shadow. Yeah.
And because of today's social media stuff, it's great because when they bombed it, they were like, "Wait, it was a fucking shadow, you idiot!" And it's like, it's just so good.
Didn't the Japanese send like weather balloons or something as well? Is that, that one? That one's nuts.
They used to, they sent weather balloons with bombs attached to them, and also just like letters, just like calling them.
When you hear about like training like dolphins to carry bombs to submarines, like dogs. I mean, this isn't it's not nice with dolphins, but like I don't know, I feel more kinship with dogs. But like dogs to like carry bombs under tanks and stuff like that. But all like what coked up maniacs were like in a boardroom somewhere? I mean, we'll do dolphins, and those will be the way we'll do.
Not to be fucking an absolute enlightened woke bloke, but imagine you put this like ingenuity to kindness and to like making things better. So let's train a dolphin to bring a mine down and blow it and click it so it's like click off.
If we put a percentage of that sort of ingenuity into
how
like,
much we've
let's make the world a bit better.
Destroy it. Anyway, go back to your boring shadow factory.
Back to shadow factories anyway. So instead of building like huge planes basically in one place where one bomb could like just set you back to square one, the plan was essentially to like compartmentalize all this like production. So you'd like build the wings in one area, engines in another place, like sort of smart components in another place, and so on. And then you piece all the bits together in one location, and they'd be ready to go. Excuse me. And basically, these production lines were based in Wales a lot. For the same reasons I mentioned earlier, as we weren't a high-value target at the time. As Luke mentioned, we became a high-value target not long after the Battle of Britain because the Germans realised what was going on, so they realised Wales was actually a hub as well as the south of England. So yeah, like I said, Wales was a shoe-in for these factories. We had a large unemployed workforce at the time, and they were also very adept at engineering. Well, there we go. They were very adept at engineering and metalwork because obviously we're all like fucking ex-miners at the time. and we had very good rail connections back then. Before the old the beaching cuts, right? Am I right, lads? Better than Transport for Wales now, my boys.
I thought I was Transport for Wales, so better saying it. That's what I think it's best. Like,
I say that had the tone of I don't have the energy to talk about Transport for Wales right now.
I'm bad as well. Yeah.
But anyway, so. But most importantly, with those things, we were actually too far out at that time in the war. We were kind of too far out for German bombers to bother ranging that far, especially because they thought there was nothing there out in Wales. Some of the most important sites were Treforest Industrial Estate near Pontypridd, the Lion Works in Newtown, Hawarden Aircraft Factory, which is near Chester, and ROF Bridgend. And I know what you're thinking.
That's right on the corner from me now.
Yeah, well, Treforest Industrial Estate was just up the road from where I went to uni. And I know what you're thinking. I know where they were targeting Treforest Industrial Estate. Yeah. It's got fucking Nando's. It's got a cinema. It's got the bowling venue.
Yeah,
no
lads.
When
it hurts.
The backbone.
Morale
be depleted.
Demolish the morale. No, lads, it wasn't that. It's because
they've hit Treforest Estate. The second tower's MacArthur Glen.
They've hit the bowling alley.
Yeah. A second plane has hit MacArthur Glen.
No. Exactly right, but. It wasn't these things, unfortunately, lads. It was because the Treforest Industrial Estate, I didn't know this, was set up to accommodate the unemployed way back when. And so it had like massive infrastructure. And these were similar in these other areas I mentioned. So these factories could be like tacked on basically because they already had these like huge buildings ready to go. So the estates, they employed thousands of people. They built aircraft components, engine parts, precision equipment for the RAF fighters, all of which were put in the planes that fought in the dogfights, like over Kent and over the sea and like sort of farther afield. The shadow factories also changed the game in terms of who was doing the industrial work at the time, and they trained a lot of women in like really like highly respected engineering roles. As well as the miners that you'd expect to see there, sort of thing. But yeah, it was a bit of a game changer. I know that was sort of nationwide, really. Is that all the men were going, "Oh, we're going to get to do this." Oh, guess women in. And it's like, yeah, finally some fucking acknowledgement.
Yeah.
Yeah. So this was one of the areas, I guess, that they sort of excelled in because of the spread out nature of these factories as well. Even when one was hit by a German bomber, they could just shift production around. It was a very like fluid system, and the supply line could take like a lot of changing around very quickly. So outputs can continue, and that led the UK to replace damaged planes like a hell of a lot faster than the Germans could like keep up with. Which is why Wales then became a target, as Luke was mentioning earlier when the bombing of Swansea and everything. And yeah, that was basically all of it. But there was one I found. I was hesitant to mention this because it was one of these shadow factories in Rhydyr Mwyn Valley, and the only job it had was to just create and churn out mustard gas for the war effort. And I thought, yeah, I'm assuming just that, no masks at the time. Yeah. I'll just hold your breath, do it 30 seconds at a time. Yeah,
yeah. T-shirt above the snoz.
Yeah. I was hesitant to mention that just because it's a lot less like national effort, beat back the Nazis. It's a lot more like, oh, that's war crime. That's like,
that's quite minging. It feels quite, doesn't it?
Yeah, it makes you cringe a bit. But yeah, so I was, that was my bit about the shadow factories.
Well, you saved it with a bit of atrocities at the end there.
Yeah, as is always the case, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, that's our tour of the Welsh involvement of the Battle of Britain, which I think, for those who might have listened to other bits of the content around the Battle of Britain, it's often kind of seen as a very English thing. But yeah, like I think we kind of highlighted it. It's got a lot of involvement from the Welsh, and even though once again, kind of over producing for what kind of the numbers that we are.
We're very much again being the guys going, it's actually a bit of Wales as well.
It's actually a bit of Wales, yeah. So And that's the real important thing to remember from World War
And that
II,
is the
is
real
that
important
Wales was involved. So if you don't remember anything else...
If
and
you'll
you're
take anything from World War II, Wales was in it, all right?
Yes.
So,
And on that,
100%.
should we give a cheers to the camera and we'll listen to it. So, iechyd da, boys. For those who
da,
fought World War
Chin,
II,
chin.
cheers, boys.
Da, boys.
So,
Chin chin.
raising a toast to those who fought and sacrificed for let's not call the Great War, the Second Great War. Great War Part 2. Luke, where can people find you?
So in my house in Barry.
Go knock on his door.
Social, sorry. Yeah.
Don't dox yourself, mate. They'll be all over you.
You know what? I once got, this is the complete segue. I once was putting my bins out in Grangetown in Cardiff a couple of years ago, and a guy recognised me putting the bins out from Cardiff TV, and he offered me smack. Anyway,
Nice.
So, that's genuinely true. Places where people can find me on TikTok, I'm Luke Davies Presents, and on Instagram, Luke Davies Presents as well. Instagram and TikTok are the two I do. Yeah.
Sweet. We'll put all the links in here as well.
Sound.
And Diolch yn gwrando everyone. Thanks for listening, and we'll catch you next week.
Diolch, pawb.
Ta-ra.